They say every man, deep down, carries a secret yearning, a whisper, sometimes a shout, that there's more to his story than the predictable turn of the calendar pages, more than the steady thrum of his daily grind. He senses he was made for something greater, not just to shuffle through life, doing enough to keep the lights on and the kids fed, but to truly live a life of purpose. It's the dream that haunts him when the house is quiet and the city sleeps, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the extraordinary isn't some rare gift bestowed upon a chosen few, but a path, a discipline, forged by the millions of small, unseen efforts. This truth, simple yet profound, often reveals itself not in grand pronouncements, but in the mundane rhythm of a working man's world, in the grease and grime, the sweat and strain, the quiet, persistent hum of an engine being coaxed back to life. It's the lesson learned when you're elbow-deep in an engine bay, wrestling with a rusted bolt, feeling the years of grit beneath your fingernails, just like a man named Vince. Vince, 48 years old, though the way the light hit him in the early morning, you might have guessed a few more. He was a mechanic, had been since he was old enough to hold a wrench and not drop it. His name was a solid, no-nonsense kind of name, and it fit him. He wasn't one of those hulking types you see in commercials, all brute strength and bulging biceps. No, Vince was built for endurance. Lean, sinewy, the kind of strength that comes from a lifetime of pushing, pulling, lifting, and meticulously maneuvering heavy things into tight spaces. His shoulders had a permanent, slight forward cant, not from weakness, but from years spent hunched over engines, coaxing life back into inert machinery. The lines on his face weren't from laughter, not mostly anyway. They were etched by concentration, by the strain of peering into dark recesses, by the worry of a bill that wouldn't quite stretch. But there was also a quiet intensity about him, a steadiness that made people trust him with their livelihoods, their beat-up trucks, their family sedans, the vehicles that were, for most folks, the very sinews of their existence. His hands, those were the real storytellers. They were calloused, thick-knuckled, scarred with the occasional white line from a slipped wrench or a brush with a hot exhaust pipe. The oil and grime, no matter how many times he scrubbed them with industrial soap and a wire brush, seemed to have taken up permanent residence in the deep creases and beneath the perpetually short, blunt nails. They weren't elegant hands, not for playing the piano or painting fine art, but they were hands that understood the language of metal and torque, of frayed wires and leaking fluids. They were hands that fixed things. They worked ceaselessly, reliably. His eyes, behind the faint spiderweb of fatigue that fanned out from the corners, held a particular kind of quiet observation. They missed nothing. They saw the faint wobble in a tire, the subtle sheen of coolant on a hot engine block, the almost imperceptible tremor in a client's voice when they talked about the cost of a repair. Vince wasn't a man of many words. He didn't chit-chat or tell elaborate stories on the shop floor. He was a listener, a watcher. He absorbed the world around him, processed it with methodical patience, and responded usually with a precise diagnosis or a simple, reassuring nod. Most people saw him as a steady, no-nonsense type, the kind of guy who just showed up, did his job, and went home. And on the surface, that's exactly who Vince was. But under that quiet exterior, beneath the grease and the grime, a different battle was always being waged. But under that quiet exterior, beneath the grease and the grime, a different battle was always being waged. It was a silent war, fought mostly in the pre-dawn hours and the late-night quiet, a war between the man he was and the man he'd once dreamed of becoming. The brutal chirping of his alarm clock, a digital thing perched like a sentinel on his bedside table, declared 5:00 a.m. with unwavering precision. Every single weekday, the same shrill announcement. Vince would grunt, a low, guttural sound that was less an acknowledgement and more a protest against the new day's arrival. He'd swing his legs over the side of the bed, the familiar chill of the linoleum floor seeping through his worn socks, and begin the well-worn path. First, the coffee. Maria usually had it ready, a silent gesture of her own steady endurance. Black as the engine oil he'd soon be wrestling, it was less a pleasure and more a necessary jolt, a chemical kick to get the pistons firing in his own tired body. A quick shower, the steam briefly masking the worry lines around his eyes, then a piece of toast, eaten standing by the counter, scanning the local news headlines he'd likely forgotten by the time he pulled out of the driveway. His drive to the garage was a ritual of quiet resignation. The same cracked pavement, the same faded storefronts, the same procession of other silent commuters, all heading to their own posts in the sprawling, grinding machinery of the city. He'd pull into his spot, the faded Ford Ranger a testament to years of reliable service, much like himself. Inside the shop, the familiar symphony of air compressors, the distant clang of a dropped tool, the faint metallic tang of grease and exhaust fumes. Another day, another parade of failing transmissions, sputtering carburetors, and worn-out brake pads. He'd lift the hood, look at the tangled mess of wires and hoses, and just start. Methodically, patiently, fixing. It wasn't that Vince hated his work. He was good at it, damn good. There was a satisfaction in taking something broken and making it whole again, in tracing a fault through a labyrinth of logic until the engine hummed just right. But the satisfaction was fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the relentless churn. The money, always the money. He'd come home, tired, worn down to the bone, and stare at the stack of envelopes on the kitchen counter. Electricity, water, Maria's pharmacy bill, Leo's school fees, Alina's college tuition that seemed to grow faster than the interest rate on the savings account. The numbers would swirl in his head, always seeming to outpace the steady march of his paycheck. He worked hard, harder than most, but it felt like treading water, always just keeping his head above the surface. Beneath the surface of this predictable grind, a quiet ache persisted. It was the ghost of dreams he'd tucked away, ambitions he'd let gather dust in the corners of his mind. He once envisioned something more than just fixing other people's problems. Maybe his own shop, bigger, cleaner, with new technology. Or perhaps pursuing that online course in advanced automotive diagnostics he'd bookmarked years ago, promising himself he'd start. Someday. He'd even sketched out plans for a small workshop in the backyard, a place to tinker with old engines for fun, not just for pay. But someday always receded, a mirage shimmering just out of reach. That ambitious young man, the one with the spark in his eyes and the conviction that he could build something bigger, better, had slowly gotten buried under layers of routine and responsibility. Procrastination was a quiet thief, stealing minutes, then hours, then days, then years. "I'm too tired," he'd tell himself. "The kids need me. There's no time after a 10-hour shift." The comfortable rut, though it chafed, was also familiar, safe. The idea of taking a big, unfamiliar step, of risking failure, felt like staring into an abyss. He'd watch successful people on TV, hear about entrepreneurs, and a bitter knot would form in his gut. He was capable, he knew it, but he felt perpetually unfulfilled, stuck. He knew the feeling of being able to do more, wanting to do more, but somehow just doing enough. And that silent battle, the one against his own buried potential, was slowly but surely wearing him down. The trigger couldn't have been anything dramatic, not for Vince. It was slow, insidious, a drip, drip, drip of frustration that finally overflowed. It was a silver Toyota Camry, late model, the kind that usually purred like a contented house cat. But this one had a cough, a deep, unsettling hesitation that showed up whenever it felt like it. Not a consistent miss, not a steady sputter. Just an intermittent shudder under load, a momentary loss of power that would vanish as quickly as it appeared, leaving no trace, no error code, nothing but a nervous driver and Vince scratching his head. He had the Camry for 4 days now. 4 days of meticulously checking every component known to man. He'd run diagnostics until the scanner's screen blurred. He'd swapped plugs, checked coils, tested fuel pressure, even dropped the tank to inspect the fuel pump strainer, all pristine. The wiring harness had been painstakingly traced, every inch visually inspected for nicks or pinches. He'd even taken voltage readings at various points, looking for a phantom drop. He'd consulted forums, called manufacturer hotlines, tried every trick in the book. He'd duplicated the conditions in the bay, driven it on the road, driven it hard, driven it slow, driven it just right to try and trigger the phantom fault. And each time, just as he thought he had it, it would disappear. The car would run flawlessly, mocking him, daring him to declare it fixed. Then, 20 miles later, the customer would call, voice tight with exasperation, reporting the shutter was back. The frustration wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about him. It was a mirror reflecting his own life back at him. An intermittent problem, something he knew was wrong, knew was holding him back, but couldn't quite put his finger on, couldn't quite fix. He was good at this, damn good. He could diagnose a diesel with a bad glow plug in his sleep. He could rebuild a transmission blindfolded. But this Camry, this perfectly ordinary, utterly unremarkable Camry, had him beat. It sat in his bay, a silent judge, collecting dust, costing him time, costing the customer money, and eating away at his pride. Other cars, simpler jobs, piled up outside. The rhythm of the shop was off. His usual methodical pace had devolved into frenetic bursts of activity followed by long stares into the engine bay, hoping for inspiration that never came. One evening, well past closing, the shop lights stark and unforgiving, Vince stood over the Camry's open hood. Tools lay scattered around like fallen soldiers. His hands, usually so confident, felt clumsy, useless. He'd spent another 2 hours chasing ghosts, making no progress, feeling only the slow creep of despair. He closed his eyes, leaning against the cool fender. The metallic tang of oil and exhaust fumes filled his nostrils, usually a comforting scent, now suffocating. He just wanted to scream, or walk away and never come back. He felt utterly, completely defeated. The kind of defeat that sinks into your bones, colder than any winter wind. He saw himself in that engine, complex on the surface, but with some deep, hidden, intermittent fault that kept him from running at full power. That kept him stuck, just chugging along, doing just enough, never quite reaching his potential. It was the same feeling he got when he looked at his savings account, or thought about that online course or the untouched blueprint for his backyard workshop. He was stalled. And for the first time, the sheer weight of that realization threatened to crush him. He slammed the hood shut, the sound echoing through the empty garage like a gunshot. He grabbed his coat, the familiar weight doing nothing to comfort him. He barely remembered the drive home, the streetlights blurring into streaks of yellow and white. The house was quiet, a darkness more profound than the night outside. Maria was already asleep, her breathing soft and even in the bedroom. Elena away at college, her room a tidy, silent testament to a life already moving forward. Leo, deep in teenage dreams, oblivious. Vince wandered into the kitchen, the linoleum cool beneath his worn work boots. He pulled a glass from the cupboard, filled it with tap water, and sat down at the chipped formica table. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. 3 a.m., the witching hour, the hour when the world shrinks to the size of your thoughts. And Vince's thoughts were a tangled mess, each strand pulling him deeper into a raw, brutal honesty he usually managed to avoid. He stared at his reflection in the dark kitchen window, a shadowy figure, shoulders slumped, lines etched around tired eyes. "What are you doing, Vince?" the silent voice asked. "What has your life become?" He thought of the Camry, the way it stubbornly refused to yield its secret, and he thought of himself. For years, he'd told himself he was doing fine. Providing for his family, a good job, a solid house. But beneath the surface, the intermittent misfire of unfulfilled potential had been steadily worsening. He'd buried his dreams, yes, but they hadn't died. They'd become ghosts, haunting him in quiet moments, whispering of paths not taken, of the man he could have been. He remembered the spark he used to have, the boundless energy and curiosity that had drawn him to mechanics in the first place, the joy of solving a complex puzzle. Now it was just work, a grind. He was just doing enough. Just enough to pay the bills, just enough to keep the engine running, but never enough to truly thrive, to truly live the way he'd once imagined. His life felt like a car running on 3 cylinders, competent enough to get from A to B, but forever lacking that smooth, powerful hum of a fully firing engine. The fear that had kept him tethered to his comfortable routine, the fear of failure, now felt less daunting than the fear of stagnation. The fear of waking up 10, 20 years from now, still at this same kitchen table, still staring at his reflection, still asking the same question, only with deeper lines and more pronounced regret. He saw Leo, full of youthful ambition, and wondered what kind of example he was setting. A man who aimed high, then settled for safe. A man who talked about dreams but never took the first step. The bitterness was a sharp taste in his mouth. He was good, damn it. He was capable. But capability without consistent action was just potential gathering dust. He closed his eyes, the image of that defiant Camry engine flashing in his mind. He was tired of chasing ghosts in engines, and he was even more tired of chasing ghosts in his own life. The thought brought a tremor to his hands. This wasn't just about the car. It was about everything. And for the first time in a long time, the familiar comfort of the rut felt like a suffocating grave. He was at a crossroads, though he didn't know it yet, just knew he was done. Utterly, irrevocably done with this. That this was the sputtering, cantankerous 2008 Camry that had been haunting his bay for the better part of a week. It wasn't the kind of job that paid big, but it was the kind that gnawed at a man. An intermittent misfire, a phantom shudder that would appear for a few agonizing seconds, then vanish, leaving behind only the ghost of a problem. Vince had swapped sensors, checked wiring harnesses with a fine-tooth comb, ran diagnostics until the computer glowed with exhaustion, and still nothing. The damn car would purr like a kitten for 20 minutes, then hiccup and threaten to die, only to smooth itself out again right as he reached for a tool. He leaned over the engine bay, his brow furrowed so deep it looked like a permanent canyon. The smell of oil, antifreeze, and stale coffee was as familiar as his own breath. But today it offered no comfort. He'd spent another full afternoon chasing the invisible, listening for that telltale skip, feeling for a vibration that would never quite settle long enough to be identified. He'd even sat in the driver's seat, engine idling, staring at the dash, willing the problem to show itself, feeling like an idiot talking to a machine. "Come on, you stubborn beast," he'd muttered, his voice raspy with frustration. He'd detried every trick in his book, every old mechanic's intuition, every logical step, and then some. The intermittent nature of it was designed to break a man's spirit. It was the mechanical equivalent of a kid sticking his tongue out and then quickly putting it back in just as you turned to look. The final straw came when, after yet another test drive where the car ran flawlessly for a record 30 minutes only to buck violently as he pulled back into the shop, he slammed the hood down with a thud that echoed through the empty garage. The wrench in his hand, a trusty 13, clattered against the concrete floor. He stood there, chest heaving, hands on his hips, staring at the shiny, smug front end of the Camry. He was defeated, utterly, irrevocably defeated. Not by the car itself, but by the relentless, invisible nature of the problem and by his own inability to conquer it. He drove home that night with the windows down, letting the cool evening air whip through the cab of his old pickup, trying to blow away the foul taste of failure. Mario was already asleep when he finally slipped into bed, the house quiet save for the distant hum of the fridge. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, the glow of the digital clock on the bedside table slowly ticking past midnight, then 1, then 2. The failure of the Camry wasn't just about a car anymore. It was a mirror reflecting every unfinished project, every half-hearted attempt, every buried dream. His mind, usually so precise and methodical in the garage, now spiraled, each thought a sharp splinter. The broken lawnmower in the shed, waiting for a part he'd ordered months ago but hadn't installed. The old guitar in the corner of the guest room, still dusty, still unplayed. The online lessons he'd signed up for long since expired. The exercise bike in the basement, a monument to good intentions, now draped with old clothes. He got up, the silence of the house pressing down on him, walked into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. The cold ceramic tile on his bare feet offered a fleeting, unwelcome clarity. 3 a.m., the witching hour for self-reflection. The hour when the defenses were down and the truth, raw and unvarnished, came knocking. He wasn't just tired from the day, he was tired of himself, tired of the pattern. The burst of enthusiasm, the meticulous planning, the inevitable slowing down, the quiet surrender. He'd always prided himself on his persistence at work, his ability to stick with a problem until it yielded. But that persistence, he realized with a sickening lurch, had rarely extended to himself, to his own life, to the things that truly mattered to Vince, the man, not Vince, the mechanic. He saw Alina at college, fiercely pursuing her dreams, and Leo, poised on the edge of his own future, and felt a profound sense of shame. What kind of example was he setting? A capable man, sure, but a man perpetually running on fumes, settling for just enough, dreaming big but acting small. He'd talk about saving for retirement, about finally learning Spanish, about getting back in shape, and then nothing. Or worse, a flurry of activity for a few days, then back to the comfortable rut. The complex engine problem had metaphorically been his life. Intermittent, elusive, frustratingly refusing to respond to the big, dramatic fixes he'd intermittently thrown at it. He saw now that he was applying the same flawed approach to his own aspirations. He wanted the grand transformation, the sudden leap, but he couldn't even fix a misfire that refused to show itself consistently. The thought, cold and sharp, cut through the darkness of the kitchen. He was chasing ghosts in his own life, just like he was in that damn Camry, and the thought brought with it a quiet, desperate kind of fury. Something had to change. He couldn't live like this anymore. Something had to change. He couldn't live like this anymore. The words hung in the stale kitchen air, not as a shout, but as a dull, heavy thud in his chest. It was a realization that didn't bring immediate relief, but a profound, almost dizzying sense of quiet resolve. The kind of resolve that settles in the bones when you finally admit a truth you've been skirting your whole life. He wasn't broken, not exactly, but he was stuck. And staying stuck felt like a slow, deliberate form of dying. He pushed himself up from the chair, the cheap plastic creaking under his weight. The clock on the microwave glowed 3:47 a.m. Too early for Maria, too late for sleep. He walked to the window, pulling aside the worn curtain. The streetlights cast long, lonely shadows. His reflection stared back, tired eyes, a face that had seen too many sunrises from the driver's seat of a tow truck. He knew he didn't have all the answers. Didn't even have an answer, not a big, shiny one that would magically fix everything. But he had a feeling. A deep, insistent whisper that the way he'd been doing things, chasing those big, elusive changes, was fundamentally wrong. It went back to that damn Camry engine, the one that had almost broken him. He'd tried replacing big parts, checking the obvious, hoping for a grand, immediate fix. And it had failed him, just like his grand plans for a new life had always failed him. The intermittent misfire only showed itself when it wanted to, mocking his efforts. There was no single, dramatic solution. There was only the meticulous, painstaking process of breaking it down, checking one wire, then the next, testing one sensor, then the next, not for a day or even a week, but every day until the pattern revealed itself, until the consistency of the small actions built into an undeniable truth. Vince stood there for a long time, the chill from the window pane seeping into his fingers. He closed his eyes. The engine. The broken promises to himself. The shame. The quiet fury. When he opened them again, there was a different kind of light in them, faint but steady, like a pilot light that had almost gone out. He wasn't going to fix everything overnight. He wasn't going to learn Spanish in a month, or be ripped in a week, or save a down payment in a year. That wasn't how he operated, and it certainly wasn't how life operated. Life, like an engine, responded to persistent, often invisible effort. The next morning, Maria was already up, making coffee when Vince walked into the kitchen. He poured himself a cup, black as usual. "Morning," she said, sensing something different in his silence, in the way he held himself. He just nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible shift in his gaze. He went to the old wooden desk in the corner of the living room, the one piled with bills and junk mail. He pulled out a small, unopened notebook Maria had given him for Christmas 2 years ago, a hopeful gesture that had gathered dust. He opened it to the first page. His first action wasn't some grand declaration. It was almost absurdly small. He thought about the complex engine, about breaking it down. He thought about his own finances, the constant tightrope walk. He opened his wallet, pulled out a single dollar bill, folded it precisely, and placed it inside the notebook. Day one, it felt ridiculous. $1. What was that going to do? The voice in his head, the old, familiar voice, scoffed. "This is your big plan, $1. But another voice, quieter, firmer, pushed back. "Just one, and you don't miss a day." Later that evening, after dinner, after helping Leo with his homework, after listening to Maria recount her day, he found himself back at the desk. The dollar bill lay inside the notebook. It was easy to forget. Easier to say, "I'll do 2 tomorrow." Easier to just let it slide. He stared at it for a full minute, the urge to skip, to put it off, a tangible weight in the room. But the image of that complex engine, refusing to yield to anything but consistent, granular effort, flashed in his mind. He pulled out another dollar, folded it. He hesitated, then wrote, "Day 1, $1, in the notebook. No, that was yesterday. Today was, Day 2, $1. He corrected it, a small, almost childish scribble. It wasn't a sudden burst of energy or a wave of inspiration. It was just a cold, deliberate act, the simple act of not missing a day. It was harder than he thought, not because of the dollar, but because of the mental friction, the ingrained habit of inconsistency. It was a tiny battle fought in the quiet of his living room against a lifetime of letting things slide. He did it anyway, just $1, just one day. Day 3 dawned gray and humid, the kind of sticky morning that promised another long, sweaty shift. Vince felt it in his bones before the alarm even screamed. He dragged himself through the motions, the engine problem from the previous week still gnawing at the back of his mind, a low-grade headache behind his eyes. He worked hard, bending over hot metal, smelling oil and grease, dealing with a particularly cantankerous transmission. By the time he walked through his front door, Maria's scent of garlic and oregano a welcome comfort, he was utterly spent. He ate dinner, feigned interest in Leo's rambling about a video game, and helped Maria clear the table. His eyelids felt like lead weights. All he wanted was the soft embrace of the couch and the mindless drone of the TV. The notebook sat on his desk, an accusing rectangle of cardboard. Inside, $2, 2 days. The thought of adding a third felt like scaling a mountain. Just one day, he mumbled to himself, heading to the bathroom to splash cold water on his face. The reflection staring back was haggard, tired. Just $1. But the old voice, the one that used to whisper sweet nothings about starting tomorrow, about how tired he was, how insignificant $1 was in the grand scheme of things, it was back. What's the point, Vince? You're exhausted. You deserve a break. One day won't matter. You can do 2 tomorrow. Or 5. He shuffled to the desk, his body aching, his mind a battlefield. He pulled out $1, his fingers fumbling. His hand hovered over the notebook, a heavy, invisible force pushing it away. He closed his eyes, remembering the frustration, the deep, soul-sucking feeling of being stuck. He remembered that moment, standing there, staring at the engine, knowing the only way out was tiny, relentless effort. He opened his eyes, pushed through the mental fog, and laid the dollar inside. He scrawled, "Day 3, $1, with a shaky hand. Then, with a sigh that seemed to release some unseen tension, he pulled out an old automotive engineering textbook he'd bought years ago and never finished. He forced himself to read one page, just one, before his eyes refused to focus. It wasn't about understanding it all. It was just about not missing. A week crawled by, 7 days. $7, 7 pages of the textbook. The initial almost pride had worn thin, replaced by a dull grind. The dollar felt heavier each night. Maria noticed him, quiet at the desk, but didn't say anything. Leo just assumed he was doing bills. The privacy of his battle was both a shield and a burden. On day 7, a Friday, the transmission he'd fought with all week decided to throw a fit again, delaying him past closing time. He walked home fuming, tired to his bones and still frustrated. When he got inside, a past-due electric bill lay on the counter, a stark reminder of the tightrope walk his finances had always been. Maria looked worried. He knew she was. The idea of adding another dollar to a tiny, laughably small pile when real, immediate bills loomed felt like a cruel joke. He sat at his desk, staring at the stack of dollars in the notebook, a paltry 7. They looked pathetic against the backdrop of the electric bill. "This is stupid, Vince. This is absolutely pointless. Just take the $7 and put it towards the bill. It's what you do. It's what you always do. You start things, you try, and then you realize they're not practical. Be practical now. Stop this nonsense." The inner monologue was a roaring fire, consuming his resolve. He reached for the dollars, his fingers brushing the crisp edges. He could almost feel the relief of giving up, of just going back to how things were. But then he saw the little, day 1, day 2, all the way to day 7, written in his messy script. An unbroken chain, small, yes, insignificant in isolation maybe, but unbroken. It wasn't about the money, it was about that chain. He'd never had an unbroken chain before. Not with exercise, not with learning, not with saving. He closed his eyes again, pushing back against the old familiar narrative of quitting. He pictured the engine, broken down into 1,000 tiny interconnected parts. He pictured the small adjustments, the persistent tests, the methodical process that had eventually, finally led him to the solution. He grabbed a fresh dollar, folded it, and placed it on top of the stack. "Day 7, $1, he wrote, the pen digging into the paper, a stubborn, almost angry affirmation. Then he opened the textbook. He didn't read for 15 minutes. He read for 5. His brain was fried, but he didn't miss. 2 weeks, 14 days, $14 looking like a surprisingly neat little brick in the notebook. 14 pages or perhaps a dozen of the heavy textbook absorbed or at least skimmed. The battle hadn't stopped, not really. It just changed tactics. The exhaustion was still there, the frustration with work, the nagging worry about money. But the voice that told him to quit was a little less loud, a little less convincing. It still whispered, "What's this really doing for you? It's just $1, Vince. You're still the same guy." He'd almost missed day 12. Maria had come home with news about Alina needing new books for college, a sudden, unexpected expense. He felt that familiar tightening in his chest, the automatic response to financial pressure. Cut corners, conserve, stop anything extra. His hand had gone to the stack of dollars, not to add to it, but to take from it. To sacrifice this silly habit for an immediate, tangible need. But as he sat there, notebook open, Maria already asleep, he paused. He looked at the unbroken string of dates. He de-told himself from that moment with the engine that this was about consistency, about not missing. Not about the size of the action, but the unbreakable promise to himself. What good was $1 if he broke the promise to himself? What good was an extra 5 if he reinforced the habit of giving up? He took a deep breath. He thought about Alina, working hard at college, chasing her own future. He thought about Leo, watching him even when he didn't know it. He thought about Maria, who deserved more than just getting by. He pulled out his wallet, took out $1, and added it to the stack. He wrote, "Day 12, $1. It was a quiet victory, not against some external foe, but against his own ingrained patterns, against the relentless pull of the easy way out. The battle was fought daily in small, almost invisible moments, but each time he showed up. He didn't miss. The sun kept rising, just like Vince kept showing up. Day after day. Some days the dollar felt heavy, a futile offering to a mountain of bills. Some days, the 15 minutes of reading felt like an eternity, his mind wandering back to cracked pistons and worn-out bearings. Some days, those few push-ups felt like his arms would snap, the effort a cruel joke against 48 years of a sedentary life outside of work. But he didn't miss. Around day 20, something shifted. It wasn't a grand epiphany, no choirs of angels singing in the garage. It was subtler than that. The internal wrestling match that used to consume him before each small task, the arguments, the justifications for skipping, the sheer mental drain, it started to quiet down. The path from thought to action became a little smoother, a little less overgrown with doubt. He still heard the old whispers, "What's the point?" But they were fainter, easier to dismiss. He was building a new kind of muscle, not in his biceps, but in his resolve. Maria was the first to notice. One evening, she found him at the kitchen table, not with a repair manual, but with a book on basic coding. Something Alina had mentioned was useful even for non-programmers. He was frowning in concentration, but there was a different kind of light in his eyes, not the tired resignation she was used to, but a focused intensity. "What's that, hun?" she asked, leaning over his shoulder. Vince looked up, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Just trying to understand how the world works, I guess. Thought it might help with some of these newer car systems, too. Everything's computers now." Maria just nodded, but a small spark ignited inside her. It wasn't just the book, it was the doing of it every night without fail for weeks now. He seemed lighter, less burdened. Then Leo started noticing. His dad, who usually crashed on the couch after dinner, now spent 15 minutes doing planks and squats, sometimes grunting softly in effort. Leo, with the casual cruelty of a teenager, had initially snickered. "Trying to relive your glory days, old man?" Vince had just grunted. "Just trying to be here for your glory days, kid," and kept going. But after a while, Leo saw the quiet determination, the way his dad wouldn't stop until his timer went off. There was a strength there, a different kind of strength than just lifting an engine block. By day 30, Vince wasn't just doing the things, he was becoming the person who did the things. The stack of dollars wasn't just money, it was a testament. The worn pages of the coding book weren't just words, they were small victories. The slight tightness in his muscles wasn't just soreness, it was the echo of discipline. Hope, a word he hadn't truly felt in years, started to creep back into the corners of his life, not as a desperate wish, but as a quiet, growing certainty. It wasn't about the grand gesture. It was about the unbroken chain, link after painstaking link. Weeks later, the change wasn't just internal. It was etched onto the landscape of his life. The engine problem that had triggered his desperate resolution. He tackled it not with frantic, all-day attempts, but with a systematic, daily approach. Each morning, he'd spend an hour, no more, no less, running one specific diagnostic test, meticulously logging every reading, however subtle. He'd review the previous day's data, cross-referencing, looking for the faintest pattern. It took him longer, yes, but without the old panic and scattershot efforts. On the 18th day of this new approach, he found it. A minuscule voltage drop in a sensor circuit that only manifested under very specific intermittent conditions. The kind of problem you'd never find thrashing about. He fixed it. The customer was baffled by his calm confidence. Vince just smiled a small, knowing smile. His savings, now a thick wad of bills, wasn't enough to buy a new house, but it was enough to cover Alina's books without a second thought. Enough to fix Maria's old washing machine instead of putting it off, enough to start a small emergency fund. The anxiety about unexpected expenses, which used to be a dull ache in his gut, had lessened its grip. He wasn't rich, not by a long shot, but he felt secure. And that security gave him a quiet confidence that radiated outwards. He wasn't running marathons, but the short daily exercises had chiseled away some of the softness, pulled his shoulders back, given him a little more bounce in his step. His clothes fit better. His mind, sharpened by the daily learning, was quicker to grasp new information, less prone to the fog of fatigue. He still looked like Vince, the mechanic, with the grease under his nails and the lines around his eyes. But those eyes held a different light now, a steady, clear gaze that spoke of purpose. He was still the quiet man, but when he spoke, his words carried the weight of someone who knew what he was talking about, someone who had faced down his own weaknesses and found a way through. He had become, in his own quiet way, the person he had always hoped to be. Maria noticed it first, as wives often do. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic transformation, but a gradual softening of the hard lines around his eyes, a steadying of his hands when they weren't turning a wrench. She saw the way he'd listen more, truly listen, whether it was to her recounting her day or to Leo wrestling with a geometry problem. He'd always been a good man, a reliable man, but now there was a different kind of presence about him, a quiet certainty. When the faucet started dripping in the kitchen, a task they'd both meant to get to for weeks, Vince didn't sigh or put it on a mental to-do list for tomorrow. He just went to the garage, got his tools, and fixed it. Not a big thing, but Maria saw the unbroken chain in that small action, too. Leo, a teenager always quick to pick up on shifts in the emotional weather, found his dad less prone to the short temper that fatigue used to bring. Vince started sitting with him for 15 minutes every night while Leo did his homework, not just hovering, but genuinely engaging, breaking down complex math problems into simpler, manageable steps. "Just gotta tackle a little bit of it every single day, son," he'd say, pointing to a particularly stubborn equation. "Doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be done." Leo, without realizing it, was absorbing more than just algebra. At the garage, the change was palpable. Ernie, his longtime coworker, watched Vince tackle a rusted exhaust manifold that used to make him curse under his breath. Now Vince just patiently applied penetrating oil, tapped it gently, waited, then repeated the process. No wasted motion, no frantic energy, just steady, relentless progress until the bolts finally yielded. Ernie saw the calm. "What's gotten into you, Vince?" He'd grumble, half joking. Vince would just offer a small shrug and a knowing glance. "Just trying not to miss a day, Ernie, that's all." Vince himself didn't feel like a different man. He still woke up at 5 a.m., still smelled of oil and metal by the end of the day. But the world around him felt different. The anxieties that used to cloud his mind, the gnawing dread of future bills, the feeling of being stuck, they hadn't vanished entirely, but they'd shrunk, pushed back by the steady drumbeat of daily victories, however small. He wasn't chasing some grand, elusive prize anymore. He was simply showing up for himself every single day. One evening, Maria watched him from the kitchen door as he sat at the dining table, a thick technical manual open, a pencil in his hand. He was reading about hybrid engine diagnostics, something he'd put off learning for years, always saying he was too tired, too busy. He was engrossed making notes, his brow furrowed in concentration, but without the usual tension. He looked up, caught her eye, and smiled. "This stuff ain't so bad, Maria," he said, tapping the book. "Just gotta keep chipping away at it." He closed the book, stretched, and then turned to her, his gaze steady and clear. "You know, Maria," he began, his voice thoughtful, "I used to think that to really change something, to really do something big, you needed a big plan, a huge effort, a whole new start. And yeah, those things look good on paper." He paused, looking down at his calloused hands. "But it turns out the real secret, the real muscle. It ain't about some grand gesture or a flash of genius." He looked up, his eyes holding a quiet wisdom that wasn't there a few months ago. "It's just showing up every single day and doing that one small thing you said you'd do. Doesn't matter how little. The trick is to just not miss a day. That's where the real muscle builds up, in the doing, not just the planning." He wasn't preaching, just stating a simple truth he discovered in the grind of his own life. The extraordinary, he found, wasn't something you stumbled upon in a single lucky moment. It was built brick by tiny brick, day after unglamorous day. And that, my friends, is the quiet truth Vince learned under the hood of an old pickup truck, a truth that transformed him, not into a different man, but into the man he always could have been. It was